On 8th of October 1932, Indian Air Force was formed in British India. The number 1 squadron of IAF consisted Westland Wabadi biplanes. Later, in World War II, IAF attacked Arakan air bases of Japanese Air Force that played very important role in disrupting Japanese supplies and advances in Burma. After independence, the main rivalry that Indian Air Force had was against Pakistani Air Force. In 1950s, 60s and greater part of 70s, Pakistani Air Force was qualitatively better than IAF. But after MiG-21 being introduced in Indian Air Force, Pakistani Air Force started to slowly lag behind. Comparison of Indian Air Force and PLAF is a different story. But in this video, we will be only talking about the present situation of Indian Air Force and why Indian Air Force is actually very weak and needs a quantitative and qualitative buff as soon as possible. If this does not happen, let alone China, Indian Air Force will be unable to defend the vast territory of India against a smaller nation of Pakistan. There are two major issues with Indian Air Force. One of them is quantity and other one is capability. If we talk about the combat aircraft, Indian Air Force operates about 30 fighter squadrons. Indian Air Force has about 42 sanctioned combat squadron strength. So IAF right now is operating about 60% of its sanctioned capability. Out of 500 plus combat aircraft, at least 200 aircrafts like Jaguar, some MiG-21 and great part of Mirage 2000 are dedicated for ground strike role. So Indian Air Force is mostly left with over 200 Sukhoi 30 MKI and some Mirage and MiG-29 aircrafts. IAF, an air force of such a large country, needs to have much more bigger air force for firepower projection. Even with 42 fighter squadrons, Indian Air Force capabilities are assumed to be more of a defensive than offensive role. Indian Air Force needs to transform itself into an air force with the capability of firepower projection. With this handful of combat squadrons, India can neither protect nor project its power. Indian Air Force needs at least 60 combat squadrons with over 1200 combat aircraft to be able to not just fight a two-front war but to be able to overpower the enemy with air superiority. The amount of special purpose aircrafts in Indian Air Force is significantly low. Indian Air Force needs at least 20 AWACS to be able to efficiently monitor the air battlefield. Also, majority of Indian Air Force aircraft do not have AESA radars, so AWACS will be very important. Indian Air Force operates about 25 heavy lift aircrafts. But in relation with India's huge army, Indian airlift capabilities are very low. Indian Air Force needs at least 100 heavy lift aircraft to be able to quickly deploy paratroopers and infantry across the country and potentially across the globe. To be able to deploy firepower across the globe, Indian Air Force needs more tanker aircrafts. With about 800 fighter, Indian Air Force needs at least 20 tankers in coming 10 years. If I talk about the capabilities, Indian Air Force lacks many critical capabilities that a potential superpower must have. One of those capabilities is strategic bomber. A strategic bomber is very important for a huge nation like India. Strategic bomber with 100 of laser-guided bombs can change entire course of modern war. It might be arguable, but just one strategic bomber escorted with a squadron of Rafale or Tejas aircraft can entirely decimate forward air bases of Pakistan. Sooner or later, Indian Air Force will have to understand the importance of strategic bombing. When India's main rival, China, plans to induct stealth bombers like H-20 in future and already operates a medium strategic bomber, India must deploy at least one squadron of supersonic strategic bombers. India also needs to induct at least 20 stealth fighter squadrons by 2035. India's neighbor has already deployed J-20 and India is already 15 years behind China when it comes to stealth technology. India cannot rely on last generation Rafale aircrafts for long. Since Indo-Russian 5th generation Sukhoi Pakwa project has gone downhill after India's exit, India must fast-track its indigenous advanced medium combat aircraft project as soon as possible. Indian Air Force still does not have a long-range unmanned aerial vehicle like Global Hawk, and also still looking to acquire an UCAV. Indian Air Force also need to acquire at least 5 to 6 IST-AR aircraft for battlefield intelligence gathering and target acquisition, and must be accompanied by chain of satellites. Indian Air Force also lacks a proper ground support and counterinsurgency aircraft. IAF has many indigenous options like STT-40 and HAL Sitara, which can be converted into close air support platform. Using dedicated counterinsurgency aircraft will be much more efficient than using couple of attack helicopters like AH-64 Apache. And I also believe only Indian Army should be using attack helicopters and Indian Air Force should be in support role. The other area where Indian Air Force lacks very much is electronic warfare capability. Indian Air Force currently operates 3 Gulfstream 3 SRA aircraft for electronic warfare. But these aircraft are not capable enough to operate in active battlefield environment. Indian Air Force needs a combat aircraft fitted with electronic warfare suite as soon as possible. Indian Air Force should also look for acquiring more special role aircrafts like CV-22 Osprey and CH-53 for deploying special forces in hostile environment. There are many more aspects of Indian Air Force which are needed to be addressed. There are many research and development projects which needed to be fast-tracked, but we shall talk about them in some other video. But India needs to increase its platform acquisition speed because in this new decade, technologies are introduced faster than India can acquire. If you like these kind of videos, please like, subscribe and share my videos. Spearhead over and out.